All right, it is time for thoughts and reactions to Matt Rhule's presser. Now, it's interesting as I'm seeing some of these notes. Well, I'm just going to read them and then I'll react. I've already read them, but I'm going to read them again and then react publicly. All right. Rhule said, and I quote, "Everything is about learning how to win. We have learned how to win." Now I got to pause the quote because when I read that, I was like, really? But then you got to finish his quote. Continued quote here. "But winning in November is completely different," end quote. And I was like, I'm glad you finished that off with that statement because learning how to win, I was like, I don't know if we're there yet, but learning how to win in November is different. And that is 1,000% true. It is. I just said it. All right. The games to remember are played in November. There's a reason for that. Okay. You're beat up. You're tired. You're sore. It's usually sometimes the rivalry games are usually there, but sometimes the bigger, better, tougher opponents are there. Plus, it's crunch time. Everything you do matters more, and that's harder. It's real easy to be a practice player All-American. I can name several practice player All-Americans who disappeared on a regular game day, let alone on a big-time game day, whether it's November, December, or whatever the case may be. All right. Nebraska coach Matt Rhule says defensive end linebacker Prince Will Umanyilan missed the game at Michigan State because he was in the concussion protocol. He could return this week against Maryland. All right, so my son Jacob actually got a pretty bad concussion. We're not actually sure what happened. He's going to see the neurologist tomorrow. He last week he goes, "Dad, you got to take me out of practice." And he never, ever asked to come out of practice. I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I got a headache." I'm like, "All right, hop out." Like, I don't mess with pitchers throwing arms, and I don't mess with heads. He's had a headache for a week straight. Like, he can't be in a room with the lights on. It's crazy. And obviously, I don't know what Prince Will's dealing with, but I don't know how many times I had a concussion or didn't. I lived in an era where you didn't say anything, you didn't come off the field, and frankly, you were thought of as soft. Thank God if you said something, thank God we've educated ourselves a whole lot more since then. But I'll tell you what, we see the neurologist tomorrow, and I sure hope we get some good news because right now it's kind of crazy with Jacob having a headache for a week straight, can't have the lights on in the room, trying to help him get his schoolwork done. So anyways, I know I took a random sidebar there. What I'm saying is I don't mess with people's heads, especially when it comes to concussions and things of that nature. So Prince Will, dude, I hope you're cleared to play this week and I hope you feel good. All right. Rhule compares Tua Tagovailoa to Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray. He says, and I quote, "Everything you see his brother do, he can do." End quote. All right. So I agree about comparing him to Tua Tagovailoa, his brother. I see a lot of his brother in him. That's easy to see. I don't know about Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray. I feel like that's an opposing coach buttering up an opposing player. All right. Kill him with kindness. I want Matt Burke, all-pro center for the Vikings. That's what he used to tell me. Kill him with kindness. I think that's what Coach Rhule's doing there. Don't get me wrong. Tagovailoa is a very good player, but Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, okay. On the final drive Saturday, Rhule says, and I quote, "If the ball gets to the 40-yard line, we're going to kick the field goal, and I think we're going to make it," end quote. The coach has lots of faith in freshman kicker Tristan Alvano. And I should say this is via Mitch Sherman on Twitter. A successful kick would have sent the game to overtime. You know what's funny is I agree with Coach. It had gotten to the point with Tristan because we know he's got the big leg. He was just kind of finding his way early on. He's a true freshman. I think if they get to the 40, I think he makes the kick and it's overtime. And who knows what happens. All right. Nebraska coach Matt Rhule says, and I quote, "I feel bad for our players. We're sitting at 5-4. We own 5-4. We have one game where the team scouted us." That's what scouting is called. I know what he's referencing. He's being nice. We all do. That's not called scouting. All right, we have two games where the replay was wrong, end quote. All right, replay was handled wrong. You said it, awarding touchdowns to Minnesota and Michigan State. So this is where I thought things got a little bit interesting in the presser. Now, Matt Rhule is a guy who owns his mistakes. He is a guy who takes accountability. He does not deflect blame. There's times I've actually heard him accept blame when I didn't think it was really on him, but he was doing what a head coach does. And he was accepting blame because he's the head of the program at times this year. And that's what a head coach should do. It's interesting because he kind of references some things for the first time this year in this presser. He references, all right, Gabe Ervin's touchdown just before half at Minnesota that the refs didn't count. Okay. He Matt Rhule said he's been a head coach 11 years, and he's never seen 2 touchdowns, one at Minnesota and one at Michigan State, incorrectly upheld. And I quote, and everybody's on the same page that wasn't a catch on the touchdown, end quote, at Michigan State. Also, I should mention that this is the first time Rhule has mentioned the Daniel Jackson touchdown going back to Minnesota. It's interesting to me. I was a little surprised to read this. And I'm not saying I blame the guy. But to point out refs' calls, to go back to Minnesota, to do things of that nature, it's not something I thought I would hear him do, especially going back games and games. And to be clear, I think Matt Rhule's a man of high character. What I think is going on here is there's some frustration. Hey, Michigan scouted us. Okay. Michigan had all our signs, and they knew what we were doing before we knew what we were doing. Okay, by the way, I sent out a tweet about 40 minutes ago, give or take. I'm hearing some interesting things along the lines with Michigan. It could get crazy here in the next week or two. There are Big Ten coaches that are beyond furious. And why shouldn't they be? We're not just talking about a game here. We're talking about people's livelihoods. If you win or lose a game, and that happens enough over time, that can dictate whether you get fired or whether you get a raise. Okay. There are championship games that were affected by this. There are big-time games with Ohio State and other teams that were affected by this. Winning and losing, if you're a Michigan and Ohio State head coach, the game, as it's called, Michigan and Ohio State, that's a big deal. Coaches get hired, they get fired, they get raises, I mean, Ryan Day's been criticized to the nth degree up until they beat Notre Dame. Okay. And then they beat Penn State this year for not getting the job done, especially against Michigan. Like, this is a big deal, what they have done, because it has affected championships. It has affected the college football playoff. It has affected I'm going to be honest. People, I think, forget that coaches are men trying to put food on their table for their families. And college football is a business. It's not a business more than it's ever been. It's just now more widely recognized that it's a business than it's ever been recognized before, with the TV deals and the super conferences and everything else that's going on. Like, this affects a lot of things. And I know for a fact, and I'm only hearing a small portion, so I can only imagine what I'm not hearing. There are a lot of Big Ten coaches who are irate. The NCAA is going to take way too long to do anything about this. If the NCAA ever does anything, Michigan has 90 days before they have to respond. The season's over. The College Football Playoff Committee has basically said this is not our problem. This is being laid at the feet of the Big Ten commissioner, and they want something done. Now, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, and I guess we'll see. I've heard things thrown around, such as Harbaugh being suspended again. I've heard things thrown around, such as Michigan being banned from the Big Ten title game. Who knows what'll happen, but I have heard these things from credible sources. And so what if Michigan beats Ohio State, banned from the Big Ten title game, Ohio State goes to the Big Ten title game, probably going to beat whoever they end up playing. I don't love saying that, but it's the truth. Probably won't be close. So you got a one less Big Ten conference champ. You got a 12-0 unbeaten Michigan team. Unless the College Football Playoff Committee changes their tune, they have said this is not our problem. Are they both going to get in? How does that work? I know I took a ginormous sidebar here, but I meant to talk about this in the first part of the program. And then when I read the one team scouted us line, I obviously thought of Michigan and what actually happened, sign stealing gate. And it's just like, it could get very interesting when it comes to Michigan and what does or doesn't happen, because there are some pissed Big Ten coaches, and rightfully so. And rightfully so. Here's the crazy thing. Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. That Michigan team is really good. It may be the best Michigan team they've ever had. It may be. There's a lot of football left to play. They haven't played Penn State, who they'll play this weekend. They haven't played Ohio State. They haven't played a conference championship game or any of those games. But they sure look really good, and they just look different. They just look different when you see them on the field. All right, I'm going to get back off my random sidebar. All right, back to Rhule's press conference here. Basically, Rhule, I think he's frustrated because he doesn't seem like the type of guy that would go back, 7, 8 games and bring up calls that he's never once talked about. But he can feel, and he even at what point during the press conference put his hand about a foot apart, and he said, we're this close. And I think when you're this close and you feel like there's things that are happening that are out of your control, I mean, the reffing in the Michigan State game was beyond awful. Okay. There were some bad calls missed in the Minnesota game. I would argue start a different quarterback. Don't give it to the guy who's been fumbling in practice, and it's a mute point. But Michigan State, there were some really bad calls. So my point is this. I'm going to be honest, I don't love it that he's saying all this. But if I put myself in his shoes, which I always try to do, I try to put myself in other people's shoes, look at it from their perspective as best I can. He's got to be pretty frustrated. Okay, let's see if we got anything else here from Rhule's press conference. All right. I got a couple other random things, not necessarily from the press conference. You're probably aware, if you're not, Nebraska will now play Wisconsin. Okay, November 18th, 6:30 p.m. on NBC. All right. This one's actually via John M. Bishop on Twitter, at John Bishop71. Give him a follow. Heinrich Haarberg is on pace for the highest fumble rate by any Husker quarterback in the last 12 seasons of those who have had 100-plus rushing attempts. And he's got the list out here. Guys on this list are, Adrian Martinez, Tommy Armstrong, some of those types of guys. Taylor Martinez. Haarberg, 11 fumbles and 118 attempts. That's a fumble rate of 9.3%. Again, that's Mr. John M. Bishop on Twitter. Here's something a little bit more positive, pretty exciting. Okay. One particular site ranked the top 50 tight ends in all of college football entering week 10. And Thomas Fidone ranked as the 36th best tight end in the entire country. And when you play for an offense that hasn't effectively thrown the ball a lot, pretty good sign, especially for a young guy. A young guy we all know has a bunch of talent coming off those injuries. So I'm happy to see it for him.